Hey guys, anime fanfics here. This is chapters 1 to 8 of Obito's redemption story by Yabai Assassin on Wattpad. Links to all stories are in the description below, and make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. Where am I? Obito asked, looking around in the white void that seemed endless all around him. He had just sacrificed himself to save Kakashi and his team and awaited hell that would surely come. But now he was here? Where is here? He couldn't tell. A bright light appeared before him, causing him to cover up at the intensity of it. When he removed his hand, he saw the Sage of Six Paths floating before him, looking him over. Maybe this is where everyone goes before being chosen for hell or heaven. The Uchiha thought as he looked back at the sage, waiting for him to speak. He had nothing to say in all honesty. Obito Uchiha. The sage addressed. Is this the way that you want to end things? What are you on about? Obito questioned curiously before shaking his head. He didn't care. Just judge him already and throw him in hell. Forget I asked that, I don't care. Just send me to hell, I'm sure I have others waiting for me. What would you do if I were to send you back in time? The sage seemed to ignore what he just said and asked him a question. The Uchiha paused, the question invading his do-it-already mindset. What all the things he did, of course he'd want to restart, who wouldn't? But there was no point in dwelling over his sins. He couldn't change what had happened, how many people he manipulated, controlled, killed, put a hit on. It was just too much wrong deeds. Why are you asking me this? The Uchiha inquired. How would you like to go to the past? Obito stared at the sage for the longest time, completely silent. The question the sage asked was that surprising. Why you can send people back in time? It was a shock to him in all honesty. Yes, the sage started. But only once, and just one person that is connected to me by chakra. If that was true, then the Uchiha had one question. Why are you choosing me for such a task? Itachi, Jiraiya, Nagato, maybe even Madara would be a better choice than someone like me. What about Naruto and his team? Any of them would be better than me at this. 5. It's because you are directly responsible for most conflict between the Third War and the Fourth War. The sage explained before his face changed to one that was unreadable. And besides, you see the error of your philosophy and have changed to help Naruto and his team at the cost of your life. I would have been killed after the war regardless, Obito responded darkly with a chuckle. Or put in prison for life. 2. The sage nodded, knowing what he said was the truth. Regardless of that, I'm giving you this opportunity to right your wrongs. Do you accept the deal? Why are you giving it to me? Did Naruto and the rest fail to defeat Kaguya? Obito probably knew the answer to his question, but he didn't want to believe that that Kakashi would fail in defeating Kaguya. He hoped the sage would prove him wrong. Sadly, that was no the case, as the sage confirmed his fears. Yes, they've lost. His tone switched a bit solemn. She overpowered them. I myself had trouble beating her. He added, knowing how he and his brother barely beat her. 8. Obito was silent as he looked down, his hands shaking and clenching into a tight fist. This was his fault. He helped unleash Kaguya and left the others to their death at their hands. Why did he have to be such a failure? Do you accept my offer? Will you go back and fix the past? Obito looked up after steeling his nerves, calming down. He looked to the sage, a reminiscent, determined look on his face. He had to do this, now he had no choice. I accept. The sage smiled slightly before getting down to business. First thing is, you should have access to all of your abilities you have now, except for a few. One is with Style and Hashirama's cells, since you'll be in your old body. Also, you won't have the Rinnegan, but if you want them, then you know how to gain them. The only advice I can give is to be careful and mindful of your decisions. Changing things can be difficult and could lead to disaster. Obito nodded as the sage approached him and placed a hand on him. It's time to go. Oi, Obito. Kakashi started. His usual look of utter boredom replaced by annoyance. And quite a bit of it. You're late, again. You have to be doing it on purpose at this point. Obito hadn't really been hearing him, feeling a bit weird to see the younger face of his best friend. It brought him back to those times where everything for him was simple. A simple goal, become Hokage. A simple teen, a medic he had a crush on, a sensei he respected, and a prodigy he was secretly jealous of. The only thing that wasn't simple was his role as a ninja, but honestly it was never that bad despite the war. 2 hours before, Obito woke up. And that was the first thing he noticed. The groggy feeling he had died almost instantly, replaced with intense awareness. He looked around his small flat. It was exactly how he remembered it to be. A large bookcase filled with books he read to try and catch up with everyone of his year. A small desk stood in front of the window, one he remembered he used for studying and to remember events that he was still late for. On the other side of the room was a pretty lame and small dresser he used to stash what little clothes he had been able to buy way back when. The room sort of filled him with nostalgia. Of course, he hadn't always had the best of times here, but it was certainly better than anything he experienced as a rogue ninja. Flexing his hand was enough of a reminder that he was in his younger body. He looked down at it before frowning. He had blue, long-sleeves pajamas on with the Uchiha symbol randomly thrown upon it. Sometimes it was facing sideways or upside down. Wow was really all he could think. He wasn't much for fashion, but it seemed his child self was way worse off. Ignoring it for now, he stood up. The feeling of his smaller body was not lost upon him, but he was able to ignore it. He walked over a pile of open books to get to his desk, which had his orange googles upon them. To others it had always looked silly, but he loved them, and even now, he knew he still did. He slowly put them on but didn't have them over his eyes and instead over his forehead. He didn't have to worry about his ninja headband since he knew that he used to sleep with it on because he had it on so much that he forgot it was on. He turned to go see his bathroom. Nothing remarkable or even memorable had been inside but the broken left side of the toilet. He scowled at it. That had caused him a few injuries he wouldn't speak about to this day. His eyes caught a mirror to his left, and when he turned he saw his unscarred, childlike face. He touched the right side of it, feeling it to see if the scars could be underneath. Of course it was illogical, but he just had to check, for some reason. Then a thought crossed his mind. The Sharingan, did he still have it? He decided to answer his own question. He formed a seal and chakra started sealing into his coils before his eyes turned a menacing red. All 3 tomos appeared telling him that he had the final stage to his Sharingan. He decided to up the level and added more chakra in his eyes, activating his Mangekyo Sharingan. He looked at it normally, as his curiosity had been sated. His head turned to the showers. He definitely needed a cold one. Triple X. And the loser's late again. How unsurprising. Kakashi remarked standing idly beside a tree as the rest of Team Minato awaited on Obito. Every single meetup had been like this and it was honestly getting on his nerves. No one was late this many times and it was simply an accident. But, like always, Minato and Rin had given him the benefit of the doubt. Rin laughed awkwardly. I'm sure he has a good reason. He always does. 10. Kakashi sent her a look. You mean you always give him one? Okay, enough of that. Minato interrupted, giving both his students a kind look. He's always late, Kakashi. I'd assume you'd be used to that by now. You get used to being a ninja. You get used to having a team. And you get used to having missions. Every time he said used it had caused Rin to flinch. He had said the word with so much venom and bitterness. You don't get used to someone wasting your time because he's late on purpose and for no reason. 7. Kakashi, Minato started, giving his student a stern look. Drop it. Kakashi looked down and glared at the floor beneath him but relented and didn't say a word. The 3 were quiet until Rin's usual meek voice broke through it. Sensei? About my medical ninjutsu. Yes, go on. He egged, aiming to push the conversation away from the previous topic. Kakashi didn't care to get into the new conversation. Triple X. An hour and a half later. Obito sighed contentedly as he walked out of his bathroom. He had forgotten to grab clothes before he got in, so he was only in a towel. His entire body felt very wrinkly from the effects of having stayed under the shower for too long. He really hadn't kept up with the time inside, relishing the cool water against his skin. It had probably been the best he felt since he graduated the academy. A knock on his door took him out of his thoughts. He quickly grabbed a towel and tied it around himself before answering the door. He opened it to his team, all who gave a reaction to seeing him almost naked. Rin blushed and averted her eyes, Minato gave a nervous chuckle, and Kakashi, who had been in the front of the two, took a step back in surprise. Obito himself gave no reaction. Something typical of his clan. What is it? I was taking a shower. The way he spoke had took all of them from their stupor. They all gained confused looks, clearly expecting Obito to get embarrassed and run to change quickly. Minato was the first to respond to this. Obito? Are you okay? Yeah, why wouldn't I be? Obito said evenly. He hadn't realized that the way he was acting was the problem they were talking about. To be fair, he was trying to get used to living again and being back in time. Before Minato could retort, Kakashi interrupted with an annoyed glare. Go put some clothes on and come on. We have a mission briefing to attend and we're more than enough late as is. Without even questioning, Obito agreed. Okay. Then he just shut the door to go and put some clothes on. When he did, Rin had looked at her sensei. What was that about? Minato shrugged. His guess was as good as hers. I don't know. Kakashi clicked his tongue in annoyance before turning away from the door. Probably learned how to act like a Uchiha for once. I for one like this Obito a bit better. He might have said that, but he didn't mean it. Honestly, he liked Obito just the way he was. He would never say this out loud, however. Not in a million years. Let's just ask him when he comes out. Rin suggested with a small smile in her crush's direction. Of course, she was optimistic that it was nothing serious and that he was just in the bad mood. Probably woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Yeah, that was probably it. Minato, on the other hand, thought it was something else. Something much bigger. Maybe. Just maybe. Obito had put in clothes and left with his team. As they walked through the village with Minato leading the three genin, Obito was looking around and refamiliarizing himself with the village. They walked through the market district of the village, walking past all types of stores and people. This was perhaps the most busy part of the village, and the fact that they were walking through here when they were already late was a wonder. Oi, sensei, Kakashi called out, dodging another civilian as they went on their way. We're already late, so why are we going through this part of the village? Minato smiled as he turned his head slightly to his student. Well, like you said, we're already late, so we might as well have a good view while we get there. Kakashi deadpanned. You know, sensei. Just because we're already late doesn't mean we can waste even more time by taking unnecessary detours. Rin beside him chuckled nervously as she gave out her own opinion. I agree with Kakashi. We should have just teleported to the Hokage's office so we wouldn't have to walk. Isn't it bad to waste the Hokage's time? He's always so busy. At this, Minato could only give a sheepish chuckle as he rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. Silently seeing the interaction, Obito really didn't know how to react. Seeing them all alive and well again was something he just wasn't mentally prepared for. Especially Rin, who he was the farthest away from. More often than not, he found himself looking away from her simply because he wasn't able to. Not for very long. It always brought him back to when he held her lifeless and bloodied corpse after killing the Miss Ninja that captured her. 3. He grimaced, turning his face to look at the stores and shops they crossed on the way. Reminiscently, the Uchiha picked out the stores he frequently visited as a shinobi of the village, and it brought back memories. Memories he suppressed for so long that now it was like he could see the memory play along as if watching a movie. The grimace had slipped away from his face and was replaced by a trance-like stare. The only thing keeping him moving was instinct alone, as his mind wasn't on his surroundings anymore. Each place he passed by that had a significant memory was played in front of him, even if another was already doing so. He was thrown back to reality when a hand gripped his shoulder. He stiffened as he came back and looked slowly up the arm until he met concerned azure eyes that greeted his natural onyx ones. The eyes felt as if they were piercing through his soul, able to see what was going on with him. Just as Naruto's had. His gaze had also met the concerned worry look of not only Rin but, strangely enough, Kakashi. He felt suffocated in the attention he was receiving, not at all used to it from, well, anyone. He could only stare when Minato spoke, his voice dripping with concern as he spoke slowly. "Obito, if there's something going on, you'd tell me, right? I'm always here for you, you know that? So, what's going on today?" Words formulated in his mind to respond, but the words never came out. He clenched his jaw, his mouth shut as his eyes widened as it kept its stare into Minato's. Those eyes wanted, no demanded the truth and nothing but that, and Obito so badly wanted to tell him everything. To heave everything that was plaguing his mind and cry out and beg for forgiveness. He so badly wanted to tell him the truth, but he knew he couldn't. So, he stared and said nothing with a jaw that clenched and unclenched over and over as if in a rhythm. Rin took his hand into hers, giving him an almost pleading look. She muttered, "Obito." Even with Rin holding his attention with her own heart-wrenching look, he couldn't help but be thankful that he looked away from Minato's. He didn't know if he'd break down and say everything on his mind like his body urged him to. He was uncomfortable with lack of control over his emotional state. It wasn't something he was used to. Obito spoke, his voice cracking and breaking the more he did. "See, can we get going? We're already late." He broke away from the grasp of both his teammate and his sensei and took off ahead of the group to the Hokage's office. Right now he just needed as much of a distance between them as physically possible. X. Minato looked at the fast-paced retreating form of the only Uchiha on the team as his eyes turned sad and confused. What was wrong with Obito? Something had to have happened for him to be so cold, distant, and quiet. He had barely spoken since they went to retrieve him, and when they went about the village he acted as if this was his first time seeing it. The way he was looking around almost trance-like at just about anything they passed. It really lit a fire in the usually reserved shinobi. Someone had done something to the bright, kind, and caring child that Obito was. He no longer had that same light to him, almost as if he was an entirely different person but the same at the same time. But even then, that wasn't what was entirely on his mind. It was the defensive, almost scared look the Uchiha produced when he spoke to him. The way he tensed up and with sweat dripping down his face made Minato want to vomit. A look like that on his precious student's face would not be tolerated. He hoped to Kami for whoever did this to Obito that he doesn't find them, because they won't receive a swift death. 10. As sensei, Rin muttered lowly beside him, rubbing the hand that Obito has shoved off. "What's going on?" Minato's eyes steeled in silent anger. "I don't know, but I will find out. Let's get going, we still have a meeting to attend." X. In the Hokage's office, team Minato finally arrived before the Hokage, standing away from each other almost awkwardly. Obito was the furthest from the group, probably looking the most awkward as he was turned away from the Hokage's desk, his face emotionless but a small drip of sweat framing his brow. He cleared his throat before addressing the team as a whole, ignoring the mood. "Well, since we're very late in starting this, why don't we get straight to the point? You were at the last debriefing, so we'll keep this short." Obito started to look at the corner of his eye as the Hokage of the village continued to speak. "Minato, your mission is to keep IWA shinobi forces back that will be converging on the Canopy Bridge. Their goal is to make sure their supplies get through safely, and that'll put your team's lives in jeopardy. While he does this, Team Minato, with Kakashi leading, will destroy the Canopy Bridge and cripple their supply unit. This could all but end the war since that's their main supply route." 7. Minato nodded dutifully. "Yes, Hokage-sama. Consider it done. Before we go on in more detail, Minato, do you feel your team to be ready? You won't be by their side to help them," he said, giving Minato a look that would know if he lied or not. Minato needed to have full faith in his team or he could get distracted on his own mission. It would cause a countrywide failure that could get the remaining troops in the country killed. Minato looked thoughtful as he glanced at Obito from the side of his eyes, frowning momentarily. Something was going on, something he felt, no he had to figure out. He knew something happened and it just didn't feel right to send them out on their own with their dynamic like this. It wouldn't end well. He looked towards the Hokage who could already see from the look on his face what he was about to say. "No, I don't think they're ready." He was able to ignore the almost betrayed looks Kakashi and Rin sent him when he said this. Honestly, he didn't blame them. Hiruzen leaned forward. "And why not? I'd like to speak about it privately," he said, motioning for his team to exit the office and wait in the lobby. Worryingly, Obito was the first to oblige as he almost walked away. Why didn't he refuse in typical Obito fashion? What the hell happened to him? Obito, Rin muttered in worry looking at the door he just left out of. Minato put a hand on her shoulder reassuringly, a small smile he managed to put on his face calmed her a bit. "It's okay. You two go on. Whatever we decide I'll come and tell you guys. We'll figure this out together." Rin nodded. A lot of her worry leaving her from the reassuring words that had filled her mind with optimism. Her sensei really had a way with words. As the two last remaining members of Team Minato began walking out, they could hear the start of the conversation Minato was to have with the Hokage. "This has something to do with Obito," I presumed the door shut, completely cutting off any talking going on inside the room. Looking down the hall, the two saw no sign of their teammate. But before Rin could say anything, Kakashi spoke and gained her attention. "Let me look for Obito myself. I might be able to see what's up." Rin was surprised to hear this. The shock from it clearly showed on her face as Kakashi remained neutral. But Kakashi had a, Kakashi explanation. "Don't take this the wrong way," he started, crossing his arm. "But it's obvious that whatever the idiot is going through is going to affect the mission that we've been planning for. This has Sensei's reputation as well as mine and I can't have him screw it up if he's this out of it." 3. Rin disagreed with him and couldn't help but voice it. "But don't you care about him? Emotionally? Even a little?" Kakashi lied. "No, I don't. But that has nothing to do with the mission. And it comes first, so I'll deal with him and his emotions." But she started only to be cut off. 3. Don't follow me and don't get in the way. XXX. Obito took off away from the Hokage building using the rooftops. He wanted to put as much of a distance as possible between him and Minato. For reasons unknown to him, he just couldn't bear to look at Minato's eyes. They just felt too much like Naruto's. Like father, like son, he guessed. Landing on a non-particular roof, he sat down on its edge and let out a shaky breath. That whole encounter with his team was nerve-wracking and he had to calm his raging heart threatening to beat out of his chest. When he agreed to come back to right his wrongs, he never thought that seeing his teammates would be this traumatizing. He could only imagine how he would react to seeing people he killed alive and well. He was already feeling guilt swelling in his gut at the sheer thought of it. Then the Canopy Bridge mission was right around the corner. It was a lot, really. A lot, and all of it at once. He should have been prepared for it, but he just wasn't, and it was taking all of his strength not to break down. It was similar to what he felt when he couldn't break free from Minato's gaze. What he would do next was honestly a mystery. Rin had been the only one of her two teammates to stay near Minato as he talked with Hiruzen. She didn't really have anywhere to go at the moment since Kakashi made it as clear as ever for her to stay out of his way. Naturally, this left her in the hallway right outside the Hokage's office where she was pacing in worry. She couldn't shake the feeling of it when she was all alone. It allowed her to think more about it and, worry more. The fact that she couldn't contribute to either Minato or Kakashi made it even worse. As she turned just in front of the door leading into the office, she bumped into someone sturdy, which caused her to stumble back. Rubbing her head, she looked up and started to speak before she paused when she saw who it was. "I'm sore." 1. It was an older man with shaggy black hair and X-shaped scar on his chin. Black robes covered his feet to his right shoulder as it supported his movements in his left hand. He glanced down at the Rin before speaking. His voice was firm and intimidatingly deep when he spoke. 13. "Watch where you are going." His eyes briefly scanned her face, recognizing her. Minato's student. She gulped in fear as she stared at him, only able to mutter from his intimidating aura. "Why, yes, sir." "Sorry." She stepped out of his way as he stepped forward and continued to walk to the Hokage's door. She saw him and wanted to say something, but she knew he'd turn her way and she didn't like it when he did. It was like he didn't like her and saw her as weak trash when he looked at her. It always caused her to get fearful of the dark aura that surrounded him wherever he went. When he walked in, she sighed in relief as the heavy feeling in her chest ceased and it felt as if she could breathe normally again. Maybe she should leave and let her sensei come to them. She didn't feel like being anywhere near Danzo at the moment, or really any. But not right now especially. She was sure no one did. XXX. Where would Obito have gone? This was the question hanging on Kakashi's mind as he jumped from building to building, searching for any signs of his teammate. He'd been looking for about 45 minutes but couldn't pick out the location of his teammate no matter where he looked. First his house, then his favorite restaurant, around the Uchiha compound, and finally Minato and Kushina's house, and still, he couldn't find his teammate. It was a bit frustrating since he was a solid tracker but couldn't track a clumsy fool like Obito. A clumsy fool who he wished would remain that way. It was a dynamic of his team. At first he was adverse to it, but as time went on he got more and more used to it until he wanted nothing different. Minato, the kind and caring sensei who knew what to say and when to say it. He was strong and reliable. Rin, she was smart and bubbly. The medic of the team and the glue that held them all together. Him, the prodigy know-it-all who was headstrong and independent but caring on the inside. Somewhere inside. Then there was Obito. He was, without a doubt, an idiot. But a brave, hard-working and nice idiot. He was one to dive headfirst without thinking of a plan. He was one to help anyone in need even if he had to be late for a meeting with the Hokage. He was one that strived to be Hokage even without his Sharingan and was to never give up until he completed that goal. And now he looked broken. Kakashi really didn't know what happened to the light the Uchiha used to relish in. Sure, it was annoying at times, but he honestly could never get tired of it. Kakashi stopped on a building to rest from his non-stop search, but as he did he thought of what was Obito's goal and a place he hadn't checked. He slowly turned to the Hokage faces on the mountain across the village and his eyes narrowed. He had to be there. XXX. This has something to do with Obito, I presume? The older man asked just as the door shut behind Minato's team. The behavioral difference that Obito displayed had not passed his old eyes. But it was so blatant that anyone who knew the boy would know immediately. Yes, Hokage-sama. Minato nodded in affirmation, walking closer to his desk until he stood just before it. I'm sure you of all people can tell, but it's how he's acting. It's like he's depressed or something and I can't shake the feeling it's from an outside source. Hiruzen hummed lowly as he processed the information, taking his time. Would you like for his mind to be read? It would give you the insight you seek. 3. Minato quickly disagreed with a strong shake of the head. He'll never agree to that and I won't force it upon him. 2. Hiruzen nodded slowly. What was he like days prior to this one? Did you sense anything wrong before? Minato's gaze dropped thoughtfully as he went deep into his thoughts for the past couple of days prior to this one. No sir. He was just fine, the same Obito doing what he would do. That's why I'm confused now. Because this happened today when Kakashi, Rin, and I went to go get him at his house. Perhaps we contact Fugaku to see if he knows anything. If you don't know as his sensei, then perhaps his clan's leader will know. Yes, maybe. Minato wasn't too convinced at that, but he really had no other way to find out what was going on. He knew Obito didn't talk with any members of his clan, so he highly doubted it had something to do with the Uchiha. But the Hokage had a point. A moment of silence passed between the two just before the door leading from the hall opened. Danzo stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He spoke. His voice cold and indifferent. Then we find another team suited for this mission. We have no time to wait until he feels they are ready. We're in the middle of a war. Hiruzen was about to reprimand Danzo, but Minato beat him to it, eyeing him warily. Thanks for your advice, Danzo. But I didn't ask for it. I was talking to the Hokage. Danzo's visible eye narrowed as his voice deepened in slight aggression. And I answered, because he wouldn't. A good Hokage would agree with me if he kept his emotions out of the decision and ruled with the village in mind. 4. Danzo, Hiruzen spoke calmly but firm and held no room for argument. That's enough. You have no say in the matter. Danzo's face visibly tightened, but he said nothing more. Hiruzen turned his attention back to Minato. You should take my advice and go see Fugaku. I'll give you a few days to sort out the behavior in Obito. But you have to hurry, our shinobi are dying every minute they're outside the border. Minato nodded gratefully before teleporting out of the office. Danzo, you want to speak to me? XXX. There you are. Kakashi said, walking up behind Obito as he sat atop the third Hokage's stone head. Why are you running away? Obito didn't respond. His knees were tucked comfortably into his chest as he looked at the bright cloud-filled sky above them. Only the soft breezy wind filled the quiet. Kakashi stepped onto the rock and his voice hardened. Why are you running, Obito? Kakashi, the soft, vulnerable voice Obito spoke with took almost all the firmness from Kakashi. Obito turned slightly to him, only to where half his face could be seen. Why do you care? I don't. Was his immediate response. I mean, Rin is worried. So what happened? You aren't usually like this. Obito didn't know how to respond, so he kept silent and turned back to fully face the bright sky, hair flowing gently in the soft breeze. He didn't feel like facing any of his teammates right now. He almost couldn't bear it. Obito, Kakashi muttered before grabbing his shoulder and turning him around. What he saw in the eyes of his teammate shocked him deeply. Is that the Sharingan? Red, angry eyes bore into Kakashi's black orbs as his eyes widened in shock. Obito had finally awakened his clan's ultimate dojutsu. Kakashi couldn't actually believe that the dead last of their generation had not only activated it but advanced it to its final stage. He didn't know much about the Sharingan, barely anyone outside of the clan did, but even he knew that was impressive. Wet tears were dripping from those special eyes as Obito's gaze fell to the ground. Kakashi's hand clenched and unclenched over and over as he decided what he would say next. Obito. I'm sorry, Kakashi. Obito said, curling up as he was before. He couldn't even control his own Sharingan because how his emotional state caused his chakra to fluctuate wildly. Confusion etched its way onto the silver-head prodigy's covered face. His voice took on a forceful edge. He was done asking Obito to give him information just to be confused. Obito, he gripped his shoulders as hard as he could. Tell me what's going on. None of us can help if you don't talk. If you want to help, then leave me alone. Obito yelled, throwing Kakashi to the ground. He calmed down almost as quickly as he got riled up. Just leave me alone. I need time to think to myself. He turned around and went back to looking at the sky above them. Fine. Kakashi got up from the ground, turning around to walk off the stone Hokage face. As he walked away, he felt a cold feeling building at the base of his stomach. He didn't know what it was, or what was causing it. Honestly, he felt as if this all was a waste. They should just leave Obito if he was going to continue to act all crazy and refuse help. He didn't really know how to think either. He wanted to actually help the Uchiha, but he just couldn't admit that. Not even to himself. And he knew that was the reason he couldn't get through to Obito. Because he couldn't admit he cared. He sighed. Now he needed some alone time to think. XXX. The Uchiha compound was bustling as usual. Uchiha-style sweets being sold to Uchiha and from visitors from other parts of the village. All in all, the day was quite normal and nothing really stuck out of the ordinary. It was a scene Minato teleported into as he took in his surroundings. Confirming that this was the Uchiha compound, he took off to where Fugaku did his usual paperwork during the day. Or, well, his house. He and Fugaku weren't the closest of friends, but they certainly weren't strangers considering how they'd been in the academy together. He hadn't spoken to Fugaku since the war started because of how different their roles in it were. Mainly Minato having a very active part in it. Once the yellow flash reached the door, he knocked softly but firmly. Seconds later, the door was opened by a longtime friend of Minato. Makoto Uchiha. She smiled lightly at seeing him after such a long time. Hello, Minato. I haven't seen you in a while. How have you been? Despite the dilemma he was in, Minato managed a small polite smile. He was genuinely happy to see her though. Hey, Makoto-chan. I've been good, well, until recently. Makoto's head tilted sideways a bit but she said nothing at the small remark. She stepped aside to let him in. Well, welcome Minato. Come on in. I'm sure you came to see Fugaku. Minato grew sheepish as an arm went to scratch the back of his head. Ah, it's not like that Makoto-chan. I just need to talk to him. It's about Obito. At the mention of the blue and orange wearing ninja, Makoto smiled lightly. Even if her husband didn't think too highly of him, she was very much different to where she actually liked him. His skills were a bit rough, but with some good training she was sure he'd succeed. 1. It's alright, Minato. She started, wanting to ease Minato's worrying. He was nice like that, and she could definitely see why Kushina fell for him. I know you've been deployed regularly ever since the war started. I've even got news you were supposed to be leaving today. Was that wrong? Minato answered as she closed the door behind him and led him into their clean and spacious living room. All the while they continued to talk. Ah, yes. Whoever's your informant is pretty well informed. She giggled lightly with a smile. Well, it's Kushina, so she pretty much has everything on you. Minato smiled once more. Ah, I guess. A comfortable silence passed between them as Minato sat down on the living room couch, looking around the room as if in thought. I'll go and get you something to drink. You look thirsty. Makoto said, getting up from the couch. Ah, you don't have to do that. She turned to go in her kitchen. Nonsense. Now do you want tea, or something? Yeah, tea is fine. He answered before his mind went back into his thoughts. Are you Minato-san? A small voice asked from beside him but a bit far away. When Minato turned to it he saw a young Uchiha that he recognized almost instantly. He smiled. Is that you, Itachi-kun? A small nod was the confirmation he received made his smile brighten a bit more. He waved the kid over and Itachi complied. And what have you been up to, Mr. Prodigy? I've heard that you're already able to do the fireball jutsu. He said, patting the top of Itachi's head. Even at the very young age of 3, Itachi could already do his clan's rite of passage technique, and on his first try as well. Truly, it was remarkable. I've been training when father isn't too busy, but I do train a bit on my own as well. Itachi replied just as his mother walked back into the room with tea. Ah, Itachi. Did you finish cleaning your room? She asked setting down the cup of tea in front of Minato. Itachi nodded. Yes, mother. Good. She smiled and kissed the top of his head before turning to Minato. would you still like your tea? If so, drinking it before it gets cold is preferable. Of course. He smiled before taking the drink and sipping slowly. When he tasted what it was, he smiled once more for a different reason and put the cup away from his lips. This is green tea, isn't it? Makoto smiled with a nod. I caught a glance of your face just as I opened the door and you looked stressed. Then you said you were fine until recently too. Even though he hadn't seen her in a while, she still noticed these things and helped him. She was such a good friend. He thought as he took another sip. Though he was always told he was an open book and that when he wasn't serious you could pretty much know how he was feeling by looking at him. It's good. Thank you, Makoto, really. Works like a charm. Honestly, he wasn't lying when he said that. He already felt better and could think better as a result of the tea. He took another sip as Itachi spoke. Does that really help with stress? It does, Itachi. Makoto answered, pouring and handing him a small cup. Want some? Taking the cup, Itachi muttered before taking a small sip, a hot tea taking time to get used to. Thank you, mother. You're welcome, Itachi. She smiled. Itachi, I'd like you to keep Uncle Minato company until I come back to see if your father is done with his meeting. Can you do that for me? Itachi nodded cutely, taking another sip from his cup. 4. You don't have to rush him though. I can wait. Minato said, calling after her as she began to walk away. She nodded before continuing. Minato looked toward the 2-year-old beside him who was pouting slightly as he looked at his empty cup. It was obvious he wanted some more and Minato was willing to oblige. He held up what was left in his cup and offered to Itachi. 3. Want the rest of mine? Itachi's head cutely tilted sideways as he looked at the cup, then to him. You don't have to, Minato-san. Mother gave it to you to drink. Plus, Mother said I can't drink a lot of tea because of my age. 3. Minato smiled but left the offer up. Then let's make it our little secret. I won't say a word to your mother. To drink. Plus, Mother said I can't drink a lot of tea because of my age. Itachi looked a bit unsure. Really? Of course. He took Itachi's hand and placed his cup into it. Hurry up and drink it in the kitchen. I think your mother is coming back. Itachi nodded and hurried into the kitchen just as both Makoto and Fugaku walked into the living room together. Ah, Minato. I've heard you want to speak with me. Fugaku spoke as Makoto quietly excused herself to give them privacy. Fugaku sat on the couch across from Minato. Now, what is this all about? Minato leaned forward and his hand clasped together in front of him. It's about Obito. He said slowly, drawing the sentence out. Fugaku crossed his arms with a raised eyebrow and asked, Obito? What about him? Did the boy finally awaken his Sharingan? And even if he did, he couldn't place why this would trouble Minato, as his face implied. Well, he's acting strange, really strange. He's not his usual bubbly self, you know. So I wanted to ask if you knew anything about it? Fugaku hummed. Of course he knew he had nothing to do with this supposed change in behavior for the boy, but he couldn't say that for the entirety of the clan. He knew that Obito was bullied when he was younger and even still occasionally to this day for his lack of skills. But he never let it get to him, so Fugaku would be honestly surprised if that was the reason for his behavioral change. Curiosity still welling within him, Fugaku spoke. Sorry, Minato, but I'm not privy on the information you seek. I apologize for my bluntness, but the Uchiha clan, as you know, has disowned Obito because of his skills. We don't keep up with his progress, nor do we, to my knowledge, berate him. But if I'll find out if anything like that had been going on. Rest assured, if a Uchiha is responsible, I will hold them accountable. At the mention of the disowning bit, Minato's face had tightened with barely concealed anger. He knew Fugaku didn't have full control over that situation and it was mostly elders and high-ranking members of the clan, but it nevertheless made him a bit angry at Fugaku. Of course he wouldn't take it out on him as he was reasonable to his situation. Despite his anger, Minato nodded in thanks. Thank you, Fugaku. If you find anything regarding Obito, I'd like to be notified on the spot. Fugaku nodded reasonably. Of course. Triple X. Kakashi was livid right now. As Kakashi stalked through the crowded roads of Konoha, villagers moved away from him because they could feel the intimidating aura that leaked from him. Surprisingly, despite his age, he was actually very intimidating when he was pissed off. And he was just that. For the life of him, he couldn't figure out three things. One was what the hell was wrong with that idiot Obito? How could he have unlocked the sacred ice his clan possessed from being upset? From his knowledge, or a lack thereof, one could only unlock their Sharingan if someone close to them died. And Kakashi knew everyone the Uchiha was close to, and they were all alive. 2. Second, was Obito's attitude. The way he was acting was so out of the ordinary, even for him. And it came from nowhere. Just the day before, the Uchiha was bright and full of energy, but now he was tired and just looked over it all. Honestly, what caused the change was an interesting topic into itself. Finally, it was what he was feeling. He couldn't come to terms that he actually cared for his bright color-wearing teammate. That he wanted to find out, not for the mission, but for his own relief that his teammate was okay. But he didn't want to admit that, nor was he willing to accept it internally. All of that combined put the young prodigy in a rather sour mood that every living being around avoided like a plague. For good reason, of course. Well, except one vibrant redhead. Seeing someone step in front of him, Kakashi slowly looked up to see Minato's wife, Kushina Uzumaki. Though she wasn't her usual vibrant self upon seeing Kakashi's face, or well, the top part of it. She was very, very good at reading emotions. Kakashi, her hand landed on his shoulder and he looked into her eyes like a son would look at her mother. What's wrong? Kakashi's gaze fell to the ground and he said nothing. Low and motherly, Kushina spoke. Wanna walk and talk about it? Kakashi nodded. Usually, he would say no or just ignore her, but now he needed advice. With Minato out of the picture, the only one he could turn to was Kushina. She smiled, turning him around and keeping her hand on his shoulder to guide him to where they would walk. Then let's go. Kushina Uzumaki was doing what any other wife that wasn't on duty at the time was. Grocery shopping. She was just about there when she felt Kakashi as he stalked angrily through one of the busiest Konoha streets. She could sense his negative emotions and immediately went to see what was wrong. Kakashi was always in a bad mood depending on how his day went, but the way he was now was probably the worst she'd seen him in. She honestly hoped this would be the worst. For the billionth time, Kushina had repeated the line she first said to Kakashi. First she had said it because she was a bit anxious, but now she was saying it because it stuck, and bringing him with her was something that had popped in her head before she could properly think. She could give advice though, so it wasn't too bad. Kakashi, I can't help if you don't tell me what's going on. And for the billionth time it seemed that the young prodigy had ignored her. He didn't spare her a glance, but Kushina could tell that he wanted her by his side in comfort for right now. What could I do to get him to open up? Seemingly finding his voice, Kakashi muttered carefully. It's Obito. Kushina smiled kind-heartedly, walking a bit closer to the boy to let him know that she cared and had her attention. Even though he most likely knew that already. He struggled to find the right words. He won't. Kushina placed a soft hand on his silver locks. A look of reassurance and patience spreading across her face. Take your time. I'm not rushing you. Kakashi nodded slowly, and the quiet between them was interrupted by the bustling villagers around them. It was about 10 minutes until Kakashi felt he had calmed down somewhat enough to talk. Before he could speak they had arrived at the supermarket, which switched his focus briefly. What are we doing here? Kushina chuckled sheepishly, rubbing her head. Well, I was planning on going shopping, and since I saw you I just decided that you should tag along. I was trying to go for a 2-for-1. Well, let's go. He paused a bit as he started to walk and muttered for only her to hear. and I'm ready to talk about it. Normal personality gone, Kushina nodded surely. She knew whatever he had to say was to be taken serious if Kakashi was willing to open up. Even if only a bit. I'm all ears. She said softly, and he nodded, content with letting her lead through the store as he formulated what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it. Eyes downcast, Kakashi spoke in small murmurs. He didn't know how to start, so he just said the first thing he wanted to talk about. Obito has the Sharingan. Kushina stopped, looking as if she had seen a headless chicken running around. She turned to Kakashi with that look which basically looked like she was asking, "Are you serious?" He nodded. Wow. It looked as if she was very confused all before it turned into a look of barely concealed pride. I'm speechless. Yeah, Kakashi agreed in a murmur. I was too. It surprised me. I wonder if that was why he was acting so strange. I thought he would have been bragging more than anything else. Acting? Kushina questioned. What do you mean? Kakashi stuttered, not knowing how to explain his teammates' behavior with words. It wasn't something he did well at all, but this was a new type of situation with new types of feeling he hadn't felt since his father died. Obito, he isn't normal. Hearing the words come from his mouth, he clarified. He isn't acting normal. He's quiet, broody. And his eyes, they lack the same brightness they had before. Despite what he said, Kushina couldn't help the smile that graced her face. You're worried about him. I'm not. He immediately defended, crossing his arms. Rin is the one that's worried. Oh, is that so? She grinned before hitting him over the head. Don't lie, Databane. Kakashi gripped his head from the pain before glaring up at Kushina. What the hell was that for? Kushina pinched his covered chin. Because you're lying. There's nothing wrong with caring for a teammate. You should admit that to yourself. Kakashi rolled his eye as he pulled away from her to rub his burning cheeks. There's nothing to admit. I'm doing this for Rin and Minato-sensei. Right. She muttered before her face brightened as she had found one of things she was looking for in the store. She grabbed his hand with a smile. How about a day with Nachan? Kakashi deadpanned, attempting to get his arm free. He wondered how many times he was going to have to pull body parts away from her grasp. No, I'm good. She gripped him tighter with a mock smile. Seeing Kakashi in a better mood was better than being a bit late starting dinner. Nonsense. Now, let's get a move on. She pulled him along as the two had a sort of shopping day together. XXX. Obito felt a bit embarrassed. It had taken quite a while for him to calm down, trying to get used to being a Konoha ninja and seeing his once dead team. He stood on the third Hokage's stone head, overlooking the village as he wondered how he would face them. What his approach would be. Obviously he couldn't just up and say he was fine. Minato would certainly think otherwise if Kakashi and Rin bought that lame excuse. And he highly doubted they would. Kakashi was smarter than that and Rin was too worried, sometimes too much for own good. Deciding that he couldn't stay away forever, the Uchiha jumped off the rock and landed on one of the buildings beside the Hokage's office. Over another building, he saw Rin walking with her head low, an obvious frown on her face. His lips drew a thin line before he sighed. He'd start with making up with Rin. Somehow. XXX. Danzo, Hiruzen's voice was sharp with his head low, looking at his old teammate through the corner of his eyes. You were reported being in the land of water. What were you doing? Danzo felt no need to answer his teammate, regardless of his position. I simply was walking through there. Over a sea, huh? Was I reported doing anything? He asked, changing the subject from the why to the what. You weren't. Hiruzen said evenly. Danzo's eyes narrowed. Then why are you suggesting I did? What are you playing at, Hokage? He said the name with so much spite. Hiruzen sighed. He didn't know when exactly Danzo and him grew this hostile and distrusting. They had been good teammates, rivals even, aspiring to be the best of their generation. And now they seemed as hostile as enemies. Nothing at all. Hiruzen decided to switch subjects, tiring of their conversation now. As I asked earlier, you wanted to speak to me? Danzo grunted. Bull left it at that. I came to speak of this. He went inside his right robes and pulled out a blank envelope. Hiruzen regarded it with a raised eyebrow. And what is this? Danzo frown deepened when he remembered how he received this, who he received this from. Though he didn't say that part, keeping that to himself because of what that thing said. It's some type of treaty, of sorts. He explained, almost unnoticeably frowning once more. He had read the letter more times than he could count, but even he couldn't fully decipher its meaning. From the hidden mist, it seems. Naturally, Hiruzen's eyebrows furrowed from both confusion and his eyes widened in surprise. The Mist Village, while not the main faction they were fighting, were still very much a sizable threat during this war. For them to suddenly opt out of the war with a treaty like this was, well, suspicious. And what do you think of it? The Hokage finally asked evenly, a long silence passing between them. Obviously I think it's a farce. Danzo responded in a doubtful manner, his face showing it as well. After IWA, they've been the main fighting force alongside the Cloud. To think they've won a peaceful way out of this war with the force they have would be a fool's thinking. And how don't we know that they actually want peace? It was what Hiruzen wanted. He was tired of a lot of things. Some of the most important being hearing that young children fresh out of the academy had already been killed. Tired of the public complaining about such things. Tired of losing precious, innocent lives in a war that they hadn't started in the first place. Danzo snorted derisively, his voice matching once more. Don't be ridiculous. They're known as the Blood Mist Village. Those barbarians could never actually want true peace. Such an ideal doesn't exist in the first place. Danzo made good points. They no doubt would have another war in a decade or less for some reason. Their world was just like that. No amount of so-called peace ever lasted as long as a decade. 4. What we should do is use this to our advantage. He firmly placed the envelope on the desk as he turned to leave the room. And strike them where they can't recover. The old hawk left the room and Hiruzen sighed once more as he glanced down at the letter. What is going on? X. Just as Obito was about to jump down to meet Rin, the corner of his eye caught sight of Danzo and one of his rude talking to him from the corner of darkness created from the bright sun. What could they be talking about? He silently asked himself, activating his Sharingan to lip read. Their conversation was brief from his time joining, but he could definitely see Danzo telling him about a peace treaty or something similar. But, without a doubt, he saw that Danzo told him to assemble their forces. He decided he saw enough as he raced from his perched position. He still needed to talk to Rin, so he formed a seal he'd seen preformed so many times. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Beside him, a puff of smoke erupted and a copy of himself emerged from it. He nodded to his clone and his clone nodded back in understanding. He performed a seal of his own and another puff of smoke erupted around him. This time he was in an older form of himself. Orange spiral mask covering his form, the only thing missing was the Akatsuki cloak in favor of a dark featureless one with a hood. 1. Obito's clone faded into the shadows and follows after the retreating form of Danzo. And Obito turned back to Rin, who was nearly about to round a corner. I have to keep tabs on Danzo. But Rin rounded the corner and he lost sight of her. I have to fix my own problems as well. Saying that, the Uchiha leaped over to the other side of the road atop the building, intent on catching up and talking with the teammate that would most likely be the easiest to confide with. X. Minato really didn't know what he was looking for at this point. He didn't get any answers talking with Fugaku, and he was more than positive that Obito wouldn't answer his curious mind. More than he'd like to admit, Minato was a sort of a nerd. He was the type of guy to try to answer any question that would pop into his mind, using any way to solve that method. Even if it was asking for help. A good example of this is when he asked Kushina to teach him sealing jutsu when he gotten interested in its intricacies but couldn't fully figure it out on his own. 4. He couldn't do that in this situation, however. No one could provide the answers he yearned for but Obito, so he did the next best thing. 3. Search the Uchiha's apartment. Now he knew it was a blatant invasion of privacy, but he couldn't help both his curiosity and worry for the Uchiha. That brought him to what he was looking now, in the doorway trying to figure out what he should search first. The apartment was more of a flat than anything else with how small it was, but that wasn't what Minato was worried about. Just about everyone knew that the less space someone had, the least likely they would have something around. Especially important things. Minato decided after an eternity of standing at the door to first check the small desk in front of the window. He strolled over to it, intently gazing at it as he did. When he was standing before the desk, his eyes searched the calendar that laid upon the desk, his eyes filling with amusement. The calendar was filled with dates and reminders of him to be late. That made the Jounin laugh when he thought of those days where the Uchiha had been extra late. He liked the effort though. Looking over that, he found pictures stuck to what looked like a planning board. It was pictures of the days they had put where Rin wanted to take pictures to remember the moment. Looking at it now, Minato couldn't help the smile that swept his face. Those were the times. Leaving that, his gaze swept the room again. It landed on an open book atop the dresser on the other side of the room. He went over and picked it up, reading it to himself. It spoke of coming back and it spoke of a name. Even when he said it to himself, he felt a cold chill run over his body. It was something about the name itself that, for some reason, shocked his body into wanting to react as if an enemy was sneaking up behind him. He questioned himself over and over what this feeling was. Was this why Obito was acting strange? If it was, then the blonde had one question. Who the hell was Kaguya? 21. XXX. Obito's clone had been following Danzo out the village for a little over an hour. Other than the talk he saw earlier, Danzo had talked to no one else since his departure from the village. Obito had to wonder. What was going on that made Danzo so worried? He said something about a peace treaty. When he thought this, his eyes narrowed. What was going on? There wasn't a peace treaty made for the Third Shinobi World War until about a year or two later. Why was a one popping up now? Obito made an annoyed sound as leaped to another tree in the dense forest he was following Danzo into. Was his presence already changing what was happening? He had only been here for a couple of hours, there was no way. Just what was going on? His eyes widened as he suddenly came back to his senses, when he noticed the chakra of hundreds of people he froze in his tracks and hid in the darkness the high vegetation of the trees provided. His eyes activated his jujutsu, enabling him to see minute details all around him. His eyes watched as Danzo preformed several seals before a formation of rock rose up. It was dark inside, and from his position Obito couldn't see anything. He didn't have the Byakugan's zoomed-in vision. Now what? He whispered to himself quietly as the opening closed when Danzo went inside. He saw that it had security seals all around it and it required those specific seals to get in. He took notice of root members patrolling the area. Perhaps he should get rid of them first. XXX. Obito landed exactly where Danzo had before 10 minutes later. There were more members than he expected, but nothing he couldn't handle. He killed them all without a speck upon him, and even without being seen. It wasn't the toughest thing he had to do, but it wasn't the last thing he would do. Without hesitation, Obito redid the seals he saw Danzo preform perfectly. His Sharingan was to thank. Obito's features scrunched up when the underground entrance stayed closed. Instead, the seals began to glow and chakra began to spew from them at an alarming rate. Of course it wouldn't be that simple. Danzo was through after all. The seals had changed. They were chakra sensing and alarm seals, and they were about to blow his cover. That was until he activated his Mangekyo Sharingan. Kamui. With his newly acquired left eye, the seals were sucked into the dimension connected to his eye, saving him from getting caught as the connection had been cut off. Arg! Obito almost yelled as he clutched his burning eye, trying to somehow relieve the pain. What the hell was this? The burning in his eye felt as if the flames of Amaterasu had been solely focused upon it. 1. A long streak of blood ran down his face from his eye as he grimaced, stiffened, his body beginning to wobble and his vision blurred. He had to wait 10 minutes until the pain he turned into a dull ache. 4. His hand left his face and he saw the blood covering it. Surprised I didn't disperse, he said, with his left eye closed. He decided to keep it that way until his mission finished. He had forgotten all about not having Hashirama's cells in his body. He was so used to just using Kamui that he just did it without thinking about the effects that using the Mangekyo caused. It was even worse that he was now a child and the effects were entirely worse because of that. Ignoring the ache, Obito repeated the seals he'd seen Danzo preform. This time, the formation opened, and now that he was closer he could see that the darkness had been a genjutsu, and that he was too focused on Danzo earlier to pay it much attention. His one Sharingan broke right past it and he could see torches along the wall which led down a long hallway. Here we go, was all he said before taking his first steps inside, with the entrance closing behind him. Triple X. Danzo let himself sigh tiredly when he sat down on his seat in his secret office. He closed his eyes, remembering what he got the peace treaty from. He didn't believe it was human. Flashback. The weather in the land of water was always misty, always raining or snowing. If you were in this country, then one could full expect to walk without knowing what was ahead of them for a couple of miles. The mist was very thick in areas, a lot of them. Such was the weather Danzo had to deal with as he and his subordinates traveled to the Mist Village. Their goal was simply to observe and see if they could get any information to help Konoha. Danzo had made these sort of trips many, many times and, for him, this should be no different than the others. How wrong he was. He stopped suddenly, the heavy rain and thick mist obscuring his vision, but in the distance he could make out a person. But not just that, this person he was dragging another person. What the hell was this? Danzo commanded his route to stop and get into a protection formation. They did as told just as the person finally appeared in his full glory. Or it. This thing was entirely black with yellow, deep eyes staring strangely. Covered by a black cloak made the figure even harder to notice from afar, but what stuck out was what it was dragging. Danzo's route pulled out weapons as they prepared to attack. That was the body of a Konoha shinobi, more specifically, a Hyuga. She appeared to be heavily injured and barely breathing. No doubt thanks to whatever this was. Danzo looked at the body in disinterest. What is this? Supposed to scare me? No, it answered. Its deep, gurgled-like voice resounded in the open area. It even made Danzo almost physically recoil at the darkness present behind it. His eyes did narrow though. It's an offering. He dropped the body on the muddy ground below them. I represent the hidden Mist Village. We'd like to pull out of this war. Then why hand me a dead comrade? Danzo asked, already planning on how he would strike down the threat. A deep chuckle was let out by the figure. Let's be serious, Danzo. We both know that you'd sell out anyone from Konoha to become Hokage. No matter who. He looked down at the body on the ground before kicking it until she laid on her back. This isn't a regular shinobi. As you can see, this is a member from the famed Hyuga clan. But not just any member. She is the wife of Hisashi Hyuga, the brother of the clan head. What's she have to do with this treaty you speak of? Her potent Byakugan is the gift to this treaty. He answered. And why would I want something like that? Chuckling, the figure pointed to his covered arm. You've collected Sharingan on that arm of yours. I figured you want a Byakugan to help with your Jujutsu collecting. 8. Danzo couldn't keep the surprise off his face. How the hell did this thing know that? What the hell was it? even most of his route. 1. But I have a gift, this time for a different reason. The figure reached into his cloak and brought out a vial. Danzo could feel chakra in it from where he was. The pureness made a sweat run down the back of his neck, with one question running through his mind. Was that his own chakra? Holding it out, the figure spoke. This is my gift to you. This is the most potent chakra from the Sage of Six Pars. He lied. With this chakra, and her Byakugan, I found out that you could gain a slew of abilities. If Danzo was shocked, he was great at not letting it show. You wouldn't just be handing me this gift if you didn't want something in return. You said that this gift is specifically for me, and that you knew of my collection. So I ask you this, what do you want from me? The sinister chuckle that resounded from the figure was nothing short of frightening. I want to know any abnormally strong individuals from your village. That's all. 2. Flashback over. Remembering that night, Danzo clutched his covered eye which concealed that very Byakugan while he closed his book with his other hand. He had to write all this down but was unaware of who was watching him from the shadows. 1. Triple X. Holy shit. Obito's eye widened from what he just read. No way Black Setsu had come back to past, there was no way. No way he could have gotten PST, the Sage of Six Paths, or even him. In all of the mess he was going through right now, he was sure he would never, ever miss someone as slimy as Black Setsu. He was sure of it. Just, what the hell was happening right now? Obito was crouched low on a building overlooking a concession stand that Rin had stopped at. He had been following for a little over 10 minutes, trying to figure out how he would approach her. He thought it'd be pretty weird for him to just jump off the building and say, "Hey Rin. I'm fine now." He knew it wouldn't work because it sounded stupid. Fuck this. He thought. He jumped down just as she finished buying her treat. Rin. He didn't know how to start, but at least he said something to her. She turned around, recognizing his voice. When she saw him her eyes softened. Obito. She trailed off as well, not knowing what to say. They both stared at each other for what seemed a millennia, everything and everyone else fading away. That was broken when she reached out to him, gently grabbing a hold of his hand and staring into his eyes. Somehow, someway he was able to put on a poker face. It was an attempt to hide what he was feeling, something he would probably have to do the longer he remained here. It was his only defense against the intensity of Rin's deep brown eyes, the only thing keeping his from hugging her and telling her he was sorry for what he did. He might just have to stop looking his team in his eyes for a while. He didn't know if his poker face was working, but he really wished he had a mask right about now. They did really well in hiding his emotion, especially the ones that appeared in his eyes. Rin poked him in the nose and he blinked, confused. "Don't do that," she commanded with a mixture of a frown and pout. It might have been cute if her voice wasn't so full of worry. "I know you're hiding what you feel from me. Please, Obito. Please tell me what's going on. We can help you." Obito took her hands into his gently and looked down at the ground to avoid her gaze. Then he stepped back. "The only way to help me is to let me deal with this on my own." He shot her the best smile he could. "Please don't worry. Everything will go back to normal before you know it. You trust me, right?" "I do, but dash." "Then trust me on this." Obito interrupted. "I won't fail." Rin didn't look convinced but said nothing more and mustered her own smile. "Okay, but I want to know about this if whatever is happening doesn't get better. Promise me that." "I promise." Obito knew it would be the only way for her to leave the situation alone. For now, at the very least. It was all he needed though. Time. Triple X. Kaguya, 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 Minato muttered over and over as he searched books in the library. He had a Flying Thunder God seal placed practically everywhere in the village. One such place was the Shinobi Library where he was searching for that name. It was weird. The name itself just put him on edge. He didn't know why, but that didn't matter. The fact Obito talked about it with so much fear? Maybe sever caution? The blonde didn't know. But he'd have to find out who this was. He pulled out another book, stacking it with 4 other books he had already picked up. This was most likely going to take a while, but he could read fast. He had to find out whatever person could change Obito so drastically. What person by name alone could make even him tense up? He had to find out, no matter what. Triple X. Please God, let this be over. Kakashi thought in exasperation as Kushina pulled him with an iron grip to just about every shop in the market district. She asked the same question over and over. Did he want anything? 1. His answer was obvious to anyone who knew him, and he was sure she knew he'd say no, but she asked away. It wasn't like he was ungrateful or anything, but he just wanted to be alone in his thoughts for a bit. How about here? She had dragged him into another clothing store. His feet had been dragging into the dirt for so long that it brought dirt in the shop with them. Want anything? No, I really don't want anything. Can we just go to your house? They had already bought the dinner she was going to cook for the whole team. She was planning to talk to Obito herself, and dinner was just the right excuse to do so naturally. She grinned at his expression. Okay, you big baby. We can go ahead now. She laughed at the deadpan expression he shot at her. Anyway, her voice dipped. Now we just need to find Obito. Didn't you say you last saw him on the Hokage's rock? Yeah, don't know if he's still there though. Kakashi answered, mildly skimming through his mind on where the Uchiha could be if not there. Well, that's just fine, Kushina said, handing him the bag with the groceries she was going to cook with. Can you bring this to my house and set it out? I wanna find Obito and bring him myself. Kakashi nodded, and she said, might even get something out of him. I can start the udon since I know how to make that a little, but you'll have to do the rest. Kakashi said, repositioning the bag to where it would be comfortable for him to travel with. Of course, she grinned and ruffled his hair. Thank you, Kakashi. I'll make sure to give you more broth. Especially since you don't really like anything fried. Don't worry about it. He said, waving her hand away. But I want to make sure everyone enjoys it, Databane. I'm not cooking too much pork cutlets though. It's fine. Kakashi said one last time before turning and walking off in the direction of her house. The grin left her face as she walked off herself. Where would she find Obito? He could still be at the Hokage Rock. It was unlikely, but it was worth a shot. She probably should have asked him how long it was till he last saw him, but she could safely assume that it was almost 40 minutes because she had spent about that amount of time with Kakashi. Sighing almost inaudibly, she began her search for Obito. Triple X. Shikaku Nara had cited just how many books were stacked neatly on the dull brown shelves of the Shinobi Library. Of course, he would have to deliver books to the information unit so that they could update the information. He wanted to sigh again at just how long the list was in his hand. And he would have to bring it all by himself. Well, he would have if he hadn't committed an underhanded crime on one of his best friend. Said best friend had about the same look he did when he remembered the list. All these damn books, he complained. I honestly don't know how I got roped into this. Surprisingly, Shikaku had been the first to at least attempt to start. Well, can't keep complaining about it. Might as well get it over with. He mentally thanked his luck when the first book he needed happened to be in front of him. Inoichi still frowned but grabbed half of the list. Easy for you to say, he grumbled, already picking out his own first book while Shikaku found his second. Stop your complaining. I'll buy dinner, how's that sound? Shikaku asked, wanting to get him somehow to stop complaining. He was complaining to himself mentally enough. He didn't need to hear more of it aloud. I think you're speaking my language. At Inoichi's light tone, Shikaku rolled his eye and laid down another book. Lazy. I think that's the last thing you of all people could say to anyone. Inoichi grew a curious look. Well, except for your son. Ugh, the blonde just had to bring that up. The last part of that sentence had teasing written all over it. Shikaku just groaned. Just get to work. Hey, is that Minato? Shikaku turned slowly to a table where there was a large stack of books piled up. And in the middle of that was none other than the Yellow Flash himself. And he didn't look to be enjoying himself. No, in fact it was quite the opposite. The blonde sighed defectively as he closed the 5 book he skimmed through. It had been like this ever since he heard that name. Kaguya. He couldn't get it out of his mind no matter how much he tried. It had gotten so out of hand that he decided it would be best to see if Konoha had any information on this Kaguya. To both his disappointment and frustration, there wasn't much. The most he found was about a nomadic clan that had no ties to any village. Even then there wasn't any recent activity of the clan that had been documented. It only led him to believe the clan was either extinct or dormant. 1. Either way, both theories led to the same conclusion. They couldn't have been involved with Obito. Then why did he write this name in such a way? Minato thought, humming slightly. It was almost like a warning. No, that was exactly what it was. So caught up his thoughts, he didn't see Shikaku and Inoichi approach him until they were already standing in front of him. Minato only raised an eyebrow. Minato, Inoichi had been the one to speak. What are you doing? You're kinda embarrassing yourself. He said that last part to himself. Minato laid the book he just read in another pile and grabbed another book from a second pile. Just looking for something is all. Shikaku raised an eyebrow himself. With that type of look on your face? Minato blinked and brought a hand up to his face. He looked a little bit embarrassed. What face? The "I'm trying to kill you" face you got going on. You're scaring people. Shikaku pointed out. Minato chuckled nervously as he rubbed the back of his head. Really? I had that face? I never noticed. Never mind that, Inoichi looked absolutely confused. What are you looking for anyway? This seems like a lot of books. Seeing Minato's face fall had both the Jounins gaining questionable looks. It's just something I think is troublesome. Something I have to deal with. Shikaku knew from the blonde's eyes that he was only telling half of it. Is it a threat to the village? Minato shrugged, unsure. Shikaku knew this was the full truth. That's what I'm trying to find out. I'm not having much luck, but I also just started, so I can't count myself out. Not yet, at least. He had to know what happened to his student no matter what. And he would know one way or the other. He found himself with no other choice. Would you like help? Surprisingly, Shikaku had been the one to ask. He pulled a chair and sat across from the blonde. Even Inoichi raised an eyebrow. Sure. He replied dumbly as he blinked. What brought all this on was anyone's guess. Shikaku skimmed through the covers of the books. What's the criteria we're looking for? Anyone with the name Kaguya or some type of ability under the same name. Shikaku raised an eyebrow as he picked up the first book off the smallest stack. Why this sudden interest? Minato frowned and slowly said, It's caught my attention. Both of his friends raised an eyebrow. Sure. Shikaku muttered before turning to Inoichi. You should keep finding those books. It'll be easier to do two things at once. Inoichi shrugged, not know the hole he dug himself in. Sure. Triple X. Kushina was a fiery individual. It was a well-known fact about her. But what wasn't well known was her fiery personality being directed towards a goal, other than hurting someone who happened to catch her in a bad mood. That goal was to find and talk to Obito. She had heard what Kakashi had said about him but knew she needed her own opinion. What really surprised her was the fact that Kakashi said he lost his brightness. What could that have meant, and, if true, what happened to him for that to have happened? She was sure they hadn't been out of the village in a couple of weeks, despite the war. that brought her thoughts elsewhere. What would she say to him when she found him? She knew she could find him thanks to her special chakra. That wasn't the problem. How exactly would she start the conversation? Oh, hey Obito. Kakashi told me that you awakened the Sharingan and lost the brightness inside you. No, that would be stupid. She rubbed her crimson locks, slightly leaving them slightly in disarray. She couldn't think of an approach that wouldn't be weird or awkward. Her face scrunched up when she used both her hands to smack her cheeks. She was Kushina Uzumaki. She couldn't let awkwardness keep her from helping her favorite of Minato's students. She had to say something. While this ran through her mind, her physical display had passerbys looking at her as if she was crazy. Some even had the gall to say it and she heard it. That was all it took for her quick fuse to be set off as she whirled her head to face the man who recoiled lead visibly at the sight. What did you say about me, huh? She yelled with gritted teeth. Don't be a pussy, I'm right here. Say it to my face. 1. The man surprisingly gained his composure and stood to full height. He easily towered over the redhead, but she wasn't frightened in the least. She'd seen squirrels scarier than this chump. You deaf or something, bitch? The man snarled, glaring as he stepped up slightly. I said you're. 1. He was stopped abruptly when a fist smashed into his jaw, sending a tooth flying as he tumbled to the ground. He spit the blood from his mouth and quickly got up with a glare. Blood running down his lip, he gritted, "You'll pay for that." Her face hardened in barely restrained anger. Just try it. He was about to lunge at her when a small voice broke through their little moment. You Kushina? What's going on? Kushina turned to see a very concerned Rin and to her surprise, Obito who was looking oddly analytic. Obito was looking between the two, clearly he could see that she had hit him over an argument of some kind. It kinda made him wonder who in their right mind would even attempt to argue with her, knowing her reputation. Oh, nothing. She lied sweetly, a slight curve of her lip trying desperately to turn into a smile. She knew that she had been warned not to engage in any more street brawls by the Hokage, but she just couldn't help it. She was easy to anger and was already frustrated. All she needed was a trigger for that short fuse. Just having a little trouble. The way Rin's face had twisted had showed the young Kunoichi hadn't believed a word of that sentence. But she was too shy to really say that out loud. I don't think this is a little trouble. Obito copied pointedly, his expression deadpan as he pointed a finger. I'm telling you it's not what it looks like. She cried out defensively. Yep, she was definitely in deep shit now. Hiruzen wouldn't take this lightly and she almost grimaced at that can of worms. I believe you, Kushina. Rin supplied slowly, red marring her features. That didn't sound at all convincing. However, the redhead went with it. See, it's nothing. Her adversary seemed to have different thoughts, obviously he didn't take a punch to the jaw lightly. You think this is nothing, bitch? You have another thing coming. He made to lunge at her once again but was again stopped. This time it wasn't by a voice or even physically. It was a cold, deadly feeling that rose all the hairs on his skin. Instinctively, he stepped back, all of the anger leaving him. He felt overwhelmed from the strange pressure, putting his senses in overdrive. 2. His head drifted to the source. It was the goggles-wearing idiot he'd seen before. But now, he looked like no idiot. His face hadn't changed, but his eyes, those eyes. They held absolute darkness. 1. Get lost. Those words rang through his head over and over before he all but ran away. The three watched his retreating form and Obito closed his eyes, releasing his killing intent just as suddenly as it appeared. He sighed audibly as his face relaxed. He needed that. It was a bit unnecessary, but it relieved some stress and got rid of an annoyance. It was a win-win. Unfortunately, the two females had different opinions on the matter. He froze when he realized he'd just messed up hard. Obito, Kushina's voice had hardened as if she was facing an enemy, changing from the light sweet tone it had been earlier. What the hell was that? Obito only stared. Rin looked between the two, clearly nervous while her eyes held fear. Seeing that look, Obito lowered his head. I'm sorry. It was nothing. He muttered, tone devoid of emotion. This was what Kakashi was talking about. The second she looked into his eyes she knew something was different wrong. That brightness, that naivete was all gone. And the only thing that replaced it was a cold, dead look that even she couldn't place. As minute as it was, even his chakra was different. It was more dark, deep, almost sad, but it had a sense of calm. She honestly couldn't describe what she felt in words. It was simply too weird. 1. Obito, what happened to you? Tense was the silence that swept through the three. The only thing changing it were the bustling of the village that now just seemed so far away. It was like they were in a whole different world from everyone else around them. Obito broke through the silence with a muzzled cough. You came to speak to me, Nachan. I can tell. Kushina swallowed. She almost couldn't bear that look in her eye. She tried but her voice cracked. She sighed but it came out shaky. She turned minutely. Just follow me. When she began to walk the two genin followed behind. Triple X. Kakashi was humming a light tone, watching the udon boil in the pot as he leaned on the counter across from the stove. He was thinking, but it wasn't too deep, he'd done enough of that for one day. He was donning Kushina's pink apron he was sure was a gift from Makoto. It might have been a little embarrassing but it was comfortable and keep him from making a mess on his own clothing. But still, he was glad no one was here to see it. Just as the thought crossed his mind, Minato appeared in a yellow flash right in front of him. Minato blinked owlishly upon seeing him and Kakashi stared back, glad for the mask covering his reddening cheeks. 1. Minato gave a small smile, chuckling a small bit. Hi Kakashi. Didn't expect to see you here. What are you doing here anyway? Kakashi regained his composure quickly and pointed behind the jounin. Starting dinner for Kushina, he said when Minato turned. Minato nodded and turned back to his student. I see. You must have met back up with her after the briefing. Minato gave a reading smile. But why the apron? Damn it, he thought he got away with it. The embarrassment came back even worse. You have nothing to say, he said, turning his back to Minato and crossing his arms. I've seen you wear this too. Minato wasn't embarrassed though, shrugging lightly. I never said anything was wrong with it. Pink is a good color. Kakashi's nose twitched and he ran over to pot. Crap, it's going to burn. Minato was over the stove fast. More water needs to be in there, Kakashi. How much did you even put in there? In his rush to pick the pot up, he'd forgotten just how long it had been under the heater. Only when he picked it up did he react. He yelled loudly, tossing the pot into the air and away as he tried dealing with the burning sensation on his palms. As they slightly burned, Udon flew through the air. Kushina, Obito, and Rin chose that moment to enter the house, watching it splat on the floor. Suddenly a heavy pressure filled the house and Rin flinched away from the redhead as she looked ready to burst. Slowly and shakily, she lifted a tightly clenched fist into the air and glared at the two idiots like a burning sun. You're dead. Kakashi and Minato began cleaning the kitchen floor with steaming heads as Kushina stalked off to her bedroom she shared with Minato. What happened? Rin asked unsurprisingly, a nervous sweat still dripping from the pressure of Kushina's rage. She felt like Kushina was about to kill them all. Kakashi looked up from drying up surprisingly hot water with a blank expression. Sensei thought it was a smart idea to grab a boiling pot by the sides with his bare hands. 2. I thought it was burning. Minato defended weakly, udon slipping from his hand. To the side, Obito was looking at the scene with a small hint of amusement from his slightly curved lip. He wanted to laugh along with them but knew he didn't deserve that. He didn't even deserve to be with them. To see them alive and well. The amusement went away quickly and was replaced by a small but bittersweet frown. He looked off to the side but suddenly fell down, clenching his burning eye with a startling loud yell. His teammates looked at him with varying surprise as Kushina stepped back into the room. He writhed in pain as blood seeped through his finger, clutching the eye. It was all a blur to the Uchiha, but he felt he was being moved as someone called his name in worry. He felt himself drifting off, but he could tell it had been the Sharingan that was the cause. Fuck! Was the only thing he could think when the memories from his clone came rushing back and he fell unconscious. Triple X. Minato sighed worryingly as he stood on the bedside of a sleeping Obito. Bandages had been wrapped around his eyes by Kushina and Rin when they had finally stopped the bleeding. It had been several hours since then and the Uchiha showed no sign of waking up. They had been considering taking the Raven to the hospital but wanted to wait until they could see if he was fine. Rin had found nothing wrong with him, nor had Kushina trying to use chakra to pinpoint the problem. Though she did tell him his chakra felt different than usual. But they all confirmed that he had indeed had a Sharingan, and Minato eyes narrowed when it wasn't the same three-tomo familiar pattern. He glanced over to his student, hand tightening. "Obito, what's happening to you?" he asked in a whisper-like tone. He sighed once more and got up, looking over to the dresser that sat bedside. He walked over to it and opened it to find the notebook he found at Obito's flat. He opened it and read what it said again. It didn't have any full sentences, just names and places. The one that struck out was Kaguya's, of course, but he had searched even more for the name and only found a clan that went by it. But they were nomadic and were said to have died out some time ago. They were bloodthirsty, but there weren't any strong notable members. Not even the past clan leader. He didn't want to, but perhaps he'd ask Inoichi to take a look at it. It was the only way he could know what happened without the genin telling him. Dejected and worried, the blonde left the room. Triple X. "Are you sure you're okay, Nei-chan?" Rin asked in worry, keeping her voice low from Minato, who had just walked away. Tentatively, the redhead rubbed her stomach, drawing circles around the seal. "Yeah, I just think he's upset. More than usual. I really think you should tell Sensei," Kakashi told her, arms folded as he slightly leaned on the counter. Somehow he failed to notice he still had the pink apron on. "It'll only get worse the more you hide it." She sighed and rubbed a hand through her locks. "I know, it's just Minato, he's so worried about Obito that I don't want to give him something else to worry about. But that stomach ache was pretty bad. You almost fainted." Kakashi pressed. "I know, and I'll handle it," she said, walking to the door. "Keep an eye on both of the other idiots. You know what trouble they could get in. And make sure Obito doesn't get up the minute he wakes up." "I'll try," Rin said, and Kakashi nodded. They watched as the door shut behind her before Rin sighed quite loudly and sunk into the living room couch, looking up into the ceiling. "What's going on?" Kakashi wanted to reassure her, but he knew it would only be more of false hope than anything else. He simply chose to say nothing and turned from her to look at the blank TV. Kakashi had very sharp ears and heard his sensei speak about something in the next room over. It was a bunch of names and places scattered, but it was when he said one name that the Hokage felt all sorts of things. Ranging from fear to deja vu. He wondered who was Kaguya. Triple X. Obito gasped loudly as he shot up, holding his head. Still breathing loudly, the Uchiha took in his surroundings. He was in a azure plan, streaking light passing by in the sky as he caught his breath. "Where?" He sat up slowly. "Am I?" "We are in an entirely different plane of existence." A voice answered behind him, and he turned immediately to see the Sage of Six Paths with a light smile. "Sage? I see you are accommodating quite well," the sage said. "I suppose," the Uchiha answered slowly. "What are you here for?" "I was under the impression that I wouldn't see you again," the sage hummed, bringing up his palm. "When I connected my chakra with yours, it gave my soul something to latch onto. With this connection I should be able to slip into your subconscious if I were to use your chakra, like I'm doing now. So you use my chakra to contact me. Are you here to help give this place a future? The sage nodded, lowering his palm and staring into the Uchiha's eyes. Somewhat. I suppose I'm just here to see the decisions you make and what type of man this'll make you. Obito's eyes narrowed and bile filled his words. Are you using me for some type of experiment? The sage raised his hand. Of course not, young Uchiha. I'm simply using this to see what you turn out to be and the decisions that will shape that. Obito crossed his arms, his face softening back to neutral. So you're not here trying to give me advice? Just to watch my decisions? Not necessarily. The sage answered, again lowering his hand as he looked towards his robes. I'll be able to talk to you anytime, as I'll just be another voice in your head until you've been injured enough to come to this plane. I'll set you on the right path if need be. But I believe you do not require assistance. Obito could feel it. Hope. The hope the sage had in him that he could actually contribute to a better future. He could feel no lie and no amount of doubt, and it was startling. He had just been an enemy of the world. He killed without mercy or hesitation and did all of that in the name of escaping reality. And despite his that, the old sage believed in him. Determination filled his gaze and he looked the sage right in the eyes. I won't let you down. You or Naruto. Suddenly, the Uchiha felt a strong pull on his chakra. What's going on? It seems our time in the plane together has come to an end. Your chakra is running low and you will die unless we leave now. Naturally, your body is attempting to fight against it, but it will only leave if you want it to. That sage explained. Then I'll be going, said Obito. I can't die yet, not when the future is on the line. Do well, Obito. Triple X. What could she have called me this late for? Biwako, wife of the third Hokage, asked, waiting on Kushina to meet with her. She wondered if something happened with the seal or anything else of real importance. The redhead was lucky she happened to be up and happened to like her quite a bit. Although she liked the younger woman, her temper was something she couldn't get rid of. She heard about the little scuffle the redhead got into. She was interrupted when a servant came in. Lady Biwako, Lady Kushina has arrived and is being escorted in. She nodded. Thank you, Mary. Please take the rest of the night off. The servant, now named Mary, nodded in thanks. Thank you, Malady. She exited the room and Kushina walked in. Biwako certainly didn't like the look on her face.